Welcome to Hero or Disruptor, exploring the power of teaching metaphors. I'm Garth Neufeld. In this series, Jane Hallinan and I take a deep dive into the hero's journey as applied to teaching, while also considering the transformational power of disruption. So where will you see yourself? As a guide to the next generation of heroes? Or as a disruptor of the status quo? Wherever you find yourself, thanks for joining us on this journey. All right, we are going to continue on this hero's journey. I have tried not to take over the metaphor here because realizing that there are many, many different metaphors, Jane. But how do you feel about talking about and using the hero's journey metaphor to talk about teaching right now?
I think it will work for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I know where it deviates from, or where there's something else that we, another metaphor that we could talk about. We'll bring it up, right? Obviously.
Sure.
So, okay. So today we're going to talk about the guide, the mentor, the inspiration, the person who calls you out. And in every in every story, in many stories, I'm not sure how to say that exactly, but there is a mentor. So we can take kind of popular, we can take movies and things like that. Well, Harry Potter is a favorite of yours, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And would you say that Dumbledore was the guide for Harry?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
How did that work its way out? I've only watched the movies. I've never read the books, but
that's terrible.
I know. And I've like half watched them. My daughter's read all the books, and then I'm like cooking dinner while she was watching the movies during that period of time. But talk to me about Dumbledore. What was his role?
His role to Harry was a real complex set of characteristics. I mean, he was a protector. He was someone who was inspiring. He was someone who understood the world in a much larger way than Harry possibly could. And he was very powerful. And I want to say with benign power for the most part. But that mentoring relationship was established early on. But I have to say, for people who love Harry Potter, Harry had other mentors too. Hagrid, the gamekeeper, although a lesser intelligent character, was equally important in helping him make the journey that he made. And so one of the things I love about Harry Potter is how rich it is with educational metaphor and insight.
Yeah, and different mentors or guides at different times.
At different times.
Yeah. Yeah. I do remember one thing about Dumbledore, the way Dumbledore was depicted, at least in the movies, was I think it seemed to me that Harry always knew that Dumbledore was on his side, but Dumbledore wasn't always bailing him out. Dumbledore wasn't always solving everything for Harry, which
correct.
Okay. So I don't know, maybe we'll come back to that in a way, because I think that's probably an important point. But I was just thinking about some other ones. My daughter and I just watched Black Widow. This is the Marvel female superhero, and she had I think, oh no, somebody's going to give me problems with for not knowing this, but it was her kind of adoptive father, his name is the Red something. Anyway, somebody will know that. Anyway, became her mentor. I was thinking about big movies that we've seen or stories in the Matrix trilogy. Neo has Morpheus as a guide, and right, and in the Hunger Games, Katniss Everdeen has Haymitch as a guide, and so we do see this in literature, in movies. Do you think that this is a necessary part of story?
Gee, is it necessary? It's probably not necessary, but I think it is absolutely essential when you're talking about the hero's journey. Mm-hmm. I think it fits really well in this particular metaphor.
Do we think that most character driven stories, and we'll kind of get out of the, I don't know, the fantasy part here, or the mythological part here in a moment, and talk about real students. But do you think that most character driven stories, that that those heroes, those eventual heroes, because they're people before they're heroes, that they require a little guidance, just like probably our students do.
I think it's a good parallel. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I think certainly there are times when we are aspiring to be that mentor, the person who's inviting the student to come on this particular journey, and that we ourselves have had that invitation from other people who've been influential in one way or the other.
Yeah. I do find it fascinating that this is so pervasive in story. You'd be hard pressed not to find a story that didn't have this relationship between folks. And now I'm going to get to like your story. Who were the mentors in your life?
I think I've been blessed with quite a few mentors, and some of them I've talked about on podcasts before. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to highlight just a couple here in a positive sense. I think we've also talked about the fact that people can provide negative examples that drive you and influence you in specific ways. But there are probably two that were, I'm going to say there were three that were really formative for me. The first one was an uncle who treated me like I had a brain in my head and would talk with me about philosophy while I was still in my teens, before I understood even what philosophy was. And I found his respect for what he thought I could become was very empowering. And so that bonded me to that wonderful man. In high school, I had a wonderful teacher who was a journalism person. And as it happened, I was a high school newspaper editor. And so I had an opportunity to work side by side with this journalism teacher in producing the paper every week. And I really felt empowered about how I could learn to write from that person. And so those are lessons that I've certainly carried forward. But I'm going to say at the undergrad level, so that's even more relevant here, I'm going to highlight one of my professors who taught me in a couple classes. I think he taught me an experimental and maybe sensation and perception, and some of my not favorite classes, history of psychology, which I happen to teach now and love. I didn't like it back then. But he was a joy in working outside when I would do research projects. He was very empowering with regard to treating me like I was able to do whatever it was he asked. And sometimes he asked things that were, at the time, counter-gender specific. So at one point I had to build a contraption that involved soldering. It's like, I don't know how to solder. But with his instruction and encouragement, I was able to do it and, not cause too many permanent scars on my legs from dropping the soldering iron and that sort of thing. But I think there was a way in which when you feel that kind of confidence and encouragement coming from someone, it just makes a difference in how you begin to see doors open for you. And while I didn't want to become an S&P psychologist like him, I think I really started to think a little bit more about what a teaching life might be like, partly because of his influence.
Yeah, and I think I probably mentioned these at some point on a podcast as well. As I'm sitting here right now, two guides or mentors that stick out to me. One was in high school. He was an English teacher. And as a person who kind of went through school, not really understanding or valuing education, it was just like, it was kind of thoughtless to go to school, didn't know really where it led necessarily. And his name was Rick Clark. And I remember he held us to a really high standard and came behind to support and teach and scaffold. And now that I look back with all these years of experience of kind of teaching, when I look back on it, I think it was pretty brilliant. He must have been very good at what he did, but he was not an easy person. He was there was a lot of well, I wouldn't call it screaming, but there was a lot of passion in his course. But I resonate with that, and maybe that's I think that could shut down certain people. For me, it really lifted me up. And then I had in graduate school, I had a mentor who basically made me think more seriously about myself as an academic, and was the first person to open that door for me. And this leads me to a question. As I was thinking about you and what you were just saying, do these mentors, is it a requirement in the myth, in the metaphor, that they come from the outside? Because they come from strange lands. That's how they came for me. They had all of these other thoughts I'd never encountered before, and that was part of the draw for me versus my parents or somebody who was very familiar.
Yeah, so I think from the outside, meaning not your nuclear setup. That's what we're constituting as the outside. I
think so. Now, I'd like to maybe hear you talk about that with regards to your uncle, but yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, technically, my uncle would be on the outside because lived far away, only got to see him maybe once a year. Although related, that it was not ordinary experience. To be in his presence was not ordinary. Yeah. So is it required that they be on the outside? The image that came to mind as you said that is the idea of a threshold concept, that people who are mentors pull you across the threshold into someplace that's new. And sometimes that might just be the new land is where you discover that you've got a knack for something. Or it might be that, and I'm going to say that would be the case for me and the journalism person I highlighted, that I didn't really know I could write until I was in her presence and getting her help. The person who taught me how to build equipment as part of an honors project. That was totally new and different. So that even though it was in psychology, my chosen area, it was not my chosen area of psychology. So in fact, that really was pulling me in a direction that was not something I ever expected, but grew a lot from. So yeah, it might need to be something that's out of the ordinary for it to register.
Yeah. Yeah, I see. I hear you saying this. Well, one of the themes that you're talking about is really somebody who can unlock something in you that has yet to be unlocked, or has not been to that point. And maybe that's why it's difficult to find these mentors or guides in the inner circle, because the world is so knowable. Your experiences, it's not until somebody opens that door up to a new thing that maybe some strengths or interests get unlocked, or you recognize something about yourself. It might be identity formation too. Yeah. Okay. Well, two things. I want to dive into what and I'm going to steal this from the Story Brand kind of book that we've talked about before, which claims that the mentor, a good mentor or a good guide, needs to have two things. One is in order for the hero to follow the mentor. So for us, in order for the students to follow the teacher, they need to have empathy. So the hero needs to be able to look at the guide and say, this person understands me. And then the second part is they need to have authority. So they need to have done whatever that is, their own work, be an expert, have gone further than the person that they are calling to greatness or to some sort of aspiration. Okay. So now I've got Teams coming up on my computer and I don't know why. So let me just close that down. All right. So empathy and authenticity. Let's start with empathy, which, and we didn't talk about the poor examples of guides in our lives yet, but maybe that will come in. And I suspect maybe that has something to do with empathy. But why don't you riff on this? Empathy. What are you hearing about this?
Yeah. Actually, it does link with a negative. And technically, I would say my example probably is in conflict with those principles. And that is, I did have a mentor as an undergrad whose career it turned out that I ended up emulating. But that was not someone that I would identify as a powerful mentor for me, even though my career paralleled her career, because I thought there was empathy missing. This turns out an extremely gifted teacher in the classroom, but in one-on-one interactions, there was a kind of harshness, a snippiness. I remember at one point when I was struggling with a research project that I was trying to work on with this person, she made the comment that when I walked across the graduation stage, I should wear a sign that says I owed it all to her. And in that moment, I remember it was like a door slammed, that I was doing fine work, but all of a sudden, here was someone saying, it's not about you, it's about me. And that level of narcissism, I can't say that I understood the concept really well back then, but I knew that felt like she just sucked all the oxygen out of the room. And it kind of forever changed the way I felt about her. It didn't change that I still wanted to do the things that she was doing, but I sure didn't want to be her. And so taking into account everything, it's like that now is a kind of icon for if I find myself being the least bit snippy with a student, then that's like danger. This is territory that you can harm somebody. You must be careful about what you do with this. So, I learned a lot from this person, but I don't think I learned the lessons that she necessarily had in mind about what it meant to be a person with humanity.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
If we work with this kind of these two criteria that a guide needs to have for us to for us to trust and find them useful, a useful guide that we are going to kind of give ourselves over to in some ways, it sounds like she checked the box of authority.
No question about it.
But she did not check the box of empathy.
Did not check the box. And in fact, that meant that forever, I was not going to regard her as someone who was instrumental in shaping who I was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did work with her, but would I brag about that? Nope. Would I absolutely brag about other experiences? No question about it. With other people. But that missing empathy, that was just too undercutting for me. At one point, I remember somebody said, "Oh, you're trying to be just like X," and I went, "No, I am not trying to do that. I am trying to carve out a career path that might look like that, but I'm not trying to duplicate that person. No."
Yeah. When I think about the gentleman who was a great mentor to me in graduate school, it's interesting. We shared some background. We were both Canadian living in the United States. I had just moved, a long way from home to go from Saskatchewan to California. he would invite us over sometimes, me and a couple of my classmates, to watch Hockey Night in Canada on Saturdays, and would cook for us. And there was this level of care when somebody shows you that, and I didn't even know I probably needed that connection. And maybe it's like an intuitive level of care that these people can give to you, which opens up all those other things that are going to come later. Like, for example, if I did not have that relationship with him, would I have done the work that I did, and to the quality that I did, with his, with his supervision in graduate school? So he really did check that empathy box. And I guess maybe I'll define empathy here the way I'm thinking about it as we're talking is as beyond a doubt, understanding that this person cares for me and they're not going to take up all the oxygen in the room when I'm there. Yeah.
Well, I like that, but I wonder if there's not a third component. I mean, it's not just, do you understand and are you authoritative? But I think good mentors have the capacity to spot talent. And in being able to identify talent, not just seeing it, but knowing how to nourish it, knowing how to get the person that you are attempting to mentor to get them across the threshold. And I would suspect that the person that you're talking about in the act of being kind to you, yes, that was empathetic, but my guess is he also saw something that was special in you. And a lot of his activity in becoming your mentor was organized around helping you discover what that was. You might not even have known it, but he spotted it. And that reinforced the investment of his time.
Interesting. And whether that is a conscious decision that a mentor makes or whether there is just something intuitive. I think in a previous conversation, we talked about inner gold, finding that gold in people that you just realize there's something of value. And I think that I need to mine that out of you. I typically think about it as the reverse. Like I usually find that in mentors, but I think it works. I think there is this intuitive sense that folks can have. I definitely feel like in the classroom, I can sense that in students. Those are great moments to talk to students who have that kind of potential in them, and they often have no idea.
Correct.
Yeah.
And to be able to discover that is the joy of mentoring, to be able to figure out how to create an opportunity or have a conversation or even to have, I'm thinking of an example from this week where I was able to share a private joke in class with a student who is, I got my radar on this student for that kind of potential that I'm saying, that student could be a future teaching assistant for me based on what I'm seeing in my class. That is the fun of being on this side of the journey.
Yeah. I'm going to put you on the spot and we'll see how we do. And that is, have you ever had a situation with a mentor that you can recall where they had the empathy, but not the authority, not the expertise, not the, that's the question. Yeah.
They had the empathy, excuse me, but not the authority.
And maybe we could talk about, if you want to revisit that, we can go to talk about authority a little bit first. And
Let's talk about authority a little bit first.
Okay.
Because right now I'm coming up dry with examples.
Okay. So here is the authority piece is, let me just find my notes here. So it's about competency.
Okay.
It's why should you, what have I done? Who am I that you should trust, that you should follow, that you should allow me to speak into your life? And so I would argue that there may be a third piece. You're right. But this is the second piece, the authority piece. The gentleman that I'm talking about was, he was a psychologist. He also had a kind of religious background, and that was what I was coming from. He had navigated a lot of kind of faith versus science developmentally, which I was kind of facing at that point in my life. He had also had success in academia. He had held very prestigious positions, and had done some of the things. And just as a teacher, who he was in the classroom was very inspiring. And when he spoke, I listened. It seemed like he had some life experience and some educational experience that I really wanted. I saw him as expert. Yeah.
All right. So listening to that, I guess I wonder if that's not a kind of no go situation where if someone doesn't have competence, then if you're looking for, if you're looking for a mentor, if they're not competent, that's not someone you would turn to. I mean, that just seems like it's an absolute essential.
Yeah. So let's think about a situation where it could be possible that, okay, how about this? Could there be I'm a student, an undergraduate student, and I have a professor who really cares about me and shows me a bunch of things about myself and is really inspiring and all that. But it's for an elective course that it's for a math course or something like that. And I am on my way to a different major. And so I'm going to be a psych major, and they don't know anything about that. So I think that will disqualify them in a way to continue to be my mentor just because they don't have that particular set of expertise. Not their fault.
Yeah, I would disagree.
Okay.
Because I think what comes to mind is a biology teacher I had who was competent in biology, but not psychology. And yet the way he taught the class taught me a lot about teaching. And so I would say he was extremely authoritative in his area. I trusted his area. It didn't matter that it didn't transfer directly to psychology. I was still able to learn a lot from him. So I still think the authority piece is sort of a must-have.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to try one more thing, and then
Okay.
we'll say that it's essential after we talk through this part. So let's take one of these kind of fictional characters. Okay.
Okay.
Let's take Katniss from the Hunger Games.
Okay.
She has this mentor who really cares about her, but he's also there to train her in battle as somebody who is kind of expert on this. That's exactly the skill she needs, right? That's the skill she needs. If he is empathic and really cares about her, but he's a very good woodworker, and that's what he can offer her, that is not going to get her to the point where to that aspirational identity, or to the end of her journey in the way that it actually does go down. So there's one more shot at saying maybe you could have empathy and not authority. And
in which case, then maybe what we're talking about as the goal of mentoring is the humanity side rather than professional development. So I think that would work.
Yep.
And I guess the same, if I can pull us back into Hogwarts land, Hagrid was a mentor who was not terrifically competent at a lot of things, but he was certainly a mentor in terms of his humanity. And so I think it may not have mattered that none of Harry and his cohort wanted to become animal keepers like Hagrid. But I think they would all identify with him as someone who inspired them.
Yeah. Okay. I can live with that. So let's bring it into the classroom, because I think if you want to be people's guide and mentors, that's what you think about all the time, it might be narcissistic. But I think that we can agree that it is extremely rewarding, and it's not something that it's not the only priority we have. We have many priorities, and we have priorities not only for those kind of students that we see potential in, but also those who are struggling or who maybe who will never use this as a guide. But I think that this is going to a question, very long question, and here it is. We to introduce ourselves to our students as potential guides, and we do that in two ways. Let's keep with this by telling students, I care for you. You can trust me. And by telling students, I have some expertise and I am an authority on this particular thing. So this is leading to the question, how do you let students know both of those things? Empathy, authority.
Okay, that's a good question. And I think probably the authority piece is easiest to do. In my syllabus, I'm going to say, I'm a clinical psychologist. I've had a private practice. I've been teaching for 40 some years. And I like to joke about when students visit me, they can check out my credentials, look at the wall. So I don't think it's really difficult to establish that you have authority. And I think students are frankly kind of intimidated with anyone who has doctor in front of their name. And I do, like many female academics, I do make a point to say to students, if you're going to address me, here are the appropriate forms of address that you can either call me Professor Hallinan or you can call me Dr. Hallinan. And surprise, you can also call me Jane. I will respond to any of those. I just am not so crazy about being called Ms. or Mrs. Hallinan. So if you're going to use an honorific, please use the one that I've earned. And if you are comfortable using my first name, that's fine with me too. So I think that kind of discussion on the front end helps with the authority piece. But I think in keeping with that, both in orienting students to the class and how you write your syllabus, there are clear indications of how approachable you are, how accessible you are. I usually express myself in multiple ways throughout the semester as a partner in the enterprise. When they succeed, I succeed. So I think those kinds of things reinforce empathy. And I think maybe if I can add to that one of the things that COVID taught us is the degree to which we need to make assumptions that students' lives are really, really complicated and that there are lots of threats in their lives. And so I think I've really lessened some of my more badass attitudes toward, here's the deadline, and if you don't do this, then this is going to happen. I'm a lot more negotiable about that. I just say, if you run into a problem, all you need to do, you just need to tell me ahead of time, not after the fact, because then it's really hard for me to make accommodations. But if you talk to me beforehand, we'll work out something. And I think that message pretty clearly communicates that I'm on their side. I want them to be a success.
Yeah, I think we're learning something that in maybe in institutions of higher education, maybe all education, that the authority is kind of baked in. We assume authority for the person who's standing at the front of the classroom or whatever. I'm coming back around to the fact that it's the empathy piece that you really have to convince students of, that you are there for their and available for their best interest. And I'm reminded of something we talked about last time we chatted, which is they won't always go through the door, but we can right. We can ensure that the door is open. Let me say that again, though, in a different way, because I actually don't know that we can ensure it. We can do our best with our worldview, with our experiences, with whatever we know, to open that door to the best of our ability for our students to walk through.
Well, I do think that reminds me of something that I've been giving some thought to, especially in light of all of the discussions that we've had about Black Lives Matter and privilege. If we go back to talking about the fact that a mentor can spot something in someone and work toward giving that person opportunities, I think one of the things that all of us need to be better about is making sure that we are as equitable as possible in looking for that spark in students. And maybe it helps even to be able to be more explicit about, here's my agenda. I'm looking for a spark in you. If I find this spark, there are things that can happen for you. And I think some of our students don't see themselves as having the potential for a spark. They come to the class, they want to check off the box, they want to get through. They're kind of the lower end in spec grading, like give me the minimum possible, let me get through. But I think a new challenge is to make sure that when you've got students in your class, that you're looking at them with as fresh eyes as possible to try to find the spark.
Yes. And I'm thinking about, I'm going to get into it because you opened the door. I'm going to walk through it a little bit. I'm thinking about those students who don't look like me, who are not white men, white males. And without that kind of, without greater representation of, equitable representation in institutions of higher education, if I'm a student and I'm never seeing myself in that position of authority, what does that mean for my ability to accept somebody's empathy? Like they can care for me, they can help me through this, because the hero actually has to get called up to do something, to go somewhere, to move out of their current situation. And I'm definitely not an expert on this, but I'm realizing a limitation for myself right now. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that I can call on when we're dealing with this kind of topic is I was definitely marginalized in undergrad and grad school because I was a woman interested in psychology. And so it sounds odd in today's situation where women outnumber men something like 4 or 5 to 1. But when I went to graduate school, in my class of 10 people, I was the only female. And I had just one female professor, tenure track person the entire time I was there. And so I have to say that was a little bit of a challenge, not just that there weren't a whole lot of women that I could look to for patterning, but there was sometimes a feeling of being patronized, of, short women, you're just so cute. And the projects that you're picking are cute projects. It's like, what? Or the project that you want to do for your dissertation, we don't know anything about that because that's a woman's issue. So I sort of continuously felt like I was on the outside and still, head down, plow through it. But I really feel like I didn't have a mentor in graduate school as a consequence of that.
Yep. Yeah. So there's lots to think through when we are putting ourselves into this position. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that we are putting ourselves, the best case scenario is that we can be the kind of guides that do help the most students we could possibly help. And so for sure, it's a learning thing to both have that empathy and have that authority. It's good to be aware of those students that are marginalized, who are hearing the messages like you heard, and to be sensitive to those, certainly. I think that one of the things that drew me to StoryBrand, kind of as a metaphor for many different things, but one of them teaching, was this idea of sales. And I've started to actually see sales, because this is actually a business model. This is why this guy wrote this book, to help people sell, which is, kind of interesting to think through. But his point was, if you are trying to sell something to someone, it could be a message, it could be a product, it could be that you are some folks are building an addition on my house right now, a little addition. And so, I had to get a general contractor. And so if you want people to buy what you're selling, you need to let them know you care, and you need to tell them what you're good at and what they're going to get out of it. You've got to be seen as some sort of authority. I do think that we as instructors, like you do in your syllabus, we have to be very intentional about these things, or else students are not going to buy it. They're not going to, believe us in the end. Yeah.
Or they're going to approach the class with, it's just one more class I have to get through, as opposed to opening up to the possibility that this class could change my life.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm very greedy. I want maximum impact for as many students as I can get. And so I'm pretty overt with them about this. If you figure out, for example, if you figure out how to make social psychology principles work in group meetings, you never have to be in another boring meeting ever again, because you can fix that. It's like, what? It can transform things. You can use this stuff.
Yeah. I was listening to our previous conversation, and it made me laugh again when I listened to you say, you've really got to mess it up to take psychology and make it boring.
Do.
Yeah,
you do. And unfortunately, it happens.
But in the same way, it provides us such an opportunity compared to some other disciplines to connect with our students in that kind of a way, especially the empathy way. And so I'm feeling held internally to a high standard, knowing that it's exactly what you said, that you got to mess things up pretty good not to be a mentor to students in your psychology class. We are talking about so many fundamental and applicable things in students' lives. Yeah.
Well, I think I want to add to that another thing that I've been experimenting with of late is telling students when I'm experimenting on them, so that if I'm trying something new, I might tell students about interleaving. Now, here's why we're doing this again. Okay. And then the next time it comes up, I might say, now, why are we doing this again? Because you want to see this skill become sturdy. And here's an idea. Here's a paper that's bad. I want you to grade it to see what the experience is like, so that you don't write one of those for me. And this is an experiment. I just did that this week in my capstone class, and I think the experiment worked really well. We'll have to see what the outcome is. But being overt with students about the fact that even after 40 years, I'm still working hard to improve what I do. I want that to be something that they can model as well.
Yeah. And as you do that with such transparency with them, that trust, that engagement, I think can increase at that point. Mm-hmm. And now they can, maybe move closer toward that mentor door and walk through that with those kinds of interventions.
Well, it turned out to have a nice empathic element as well, because in the middle of that conversation where we're going over this paper that's not so good, a student shook her head and said, I can't believe you have to read stuff like this. This is you earn money reading stuff like this. I said, I earn money trying to teach people how not to write stuff like this. And that's why we're going through this. But I think good teachers can inspire an empathetic response in students as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been very helpful, as sometimes it feels a little clumsy to me, the way that I am thinking through these things, and just to run this stuff by you and hear your perspective is very helpful. So that is a look at the guide, the mentor, and we'll continue on in this journey.
Until we run out of stuff to talk about.
Thanks, Jane.
Yep.